ESG is taking America's corporate world by storm. It stands for Environmental and Social Corporate Governance. Some Oklahoma lawmakers have come out against ESG and have passed legislation to limit its impact in our state. Others believe it's the future of doing business in America. With more on those opposing viewpoints and exactly what ESG is, we're joined by moderator Susan Caddell and her panel of guests for this week's in-depth conversation.
Thank you, Rich. We have panelists who really can give us the inside scoop on ESG and everything it means and entails. I'll introduce them to you now. We have Liz Arthur, who is the Director of Technical Sales for Project Canary. She's out of Denver. We have Justin Danhoff, who is the Head of Corporate Governance for Strive, and he's out of Ohio. And then we have Damon King, an investment advisor for Chapel Wood Financial Services out of Oklahoma. Thank you all for being with us. I'd like to start out by saying not everyone's going to have the same viewpoint on ESG, but Damon, I want to start with you. First, explain I had to go research it. I didn't even know what ESG was. What is ESG?
So ESG is an acronym that stands for Environmental, Social, and Governance. And essentially, it's a method of investing, a method of social investing. And if you're following ESG, you are essentially choosing to invest or giving preference to companies that place a priority on environmental efforts, being a small carbon footprint, for example, or social, meaning that perhaps they are making sure that their social footprint and being socially responsible is important. Or at the governance level, you take a look at their boards or perhaps their executive leadership, and they're making sure that they have broad representation among all kinds of different people.
All right, Justin, I want to come to you next. What is the mission for Strive, first of all? Can you explain that to us, and then how ESG comes into play?
Yeah, sure. So thanks so much, Susan. So Strive Asset Management, we're a brand new firm. We launched our first products in the New York Stock Exchange in August, our second one earlier this month. And our mission is to restore the voice of everyday Americans in corporate America and throughout corporate boardrooms. Because what we see right now is something that we have a fiduciary breach in the United States of America. That is, the everyday owners of American capital don't have their voices heard in corporate America. Let me give you a very concrete example. So say, for example, a state pension fund holder in Oklahoma. They have their money with the state pension. That money is then managed by outside firms in Manhattan who have a different belief system. So they use their shareholder voice and their shareholder vote in ways that when you poll, the everyday Americans disagree with. So they're pushing ESG initiatives that the pension fund holders themselves very often don't agree with. And so at Strive, we want to restore the voices of those individuals who have been lost in corporate America.
All right, Liz, I want to come to you. You've been listening so far. Explain what Project Canary does and why ESG is important to your organization.
So Canary is a data analytics company. We also focus on an overall engineering-based environmental assessment. So those are two sides of the business. And something we talk about often is that we believe in the measurement economy. Things that were once estimated in the past, now actually there's a requirement to be measured, and there are ways to be measured moving forward. So we really provide that bridge between industry and what is needed. We started in the energy vertical, but we're also branching out to verticals like waste and agriculture, where we also have a focus on especially methane emissions, because it is a huge part of what's changing in our regulatory space, and as well plays a big part in the E of ESG that Damon did such a great job of explaining. So for companies, there are a number of drivers that really pull people towards even trying to understand what we do, or companies like us, what we do. And part of that is if you do have investors, like David mentioned, coming in and trying to establish, what is your ESG strategy? What does that mean? We help build up that E portion. So being data driven, not letting these things be fueled by politics or opinions, but really coming back to data that is now, it's possible to be provided in a way that, this wasn't a priority or really a thing 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Damon, Justin brought up the point that some people may not want to invest in companies who focus on ESG. Have you found people concerned about that in one direction or the other among your clientele?
Very much so. And here's the thing. I don't have a single client that doesn't want clean air or water. I don't have a single client that doesn't want everyone treated with respect and dignity. It's not that they don't want opportunities for lots of people. Their primary concern is this. They don't necessarily want the investment decisions that we and the investment strategists we work with to be entirely governed by these ESG scores. One of the difficulties with a lot of the ESG scores that you'll get, and so the higher a company's ESG score is, the more closely they adhere to that mandate. The problem is there's not really any standardized set of scores. There are different kinds of scoring systems out there. So it's difficult, one system may be different than another.
Justin, Liz mentioned the focusing on climate and the energy sector, and she's, I will mention, I didn't say before, she is from Oklahoma. Started out at Chesapeake. But Justin, when it comes to the energy sector, how has this ESG been affecting the energy sector? They're so important to Oklahoma's economy.
ESG is essentially whatever an interest group can't get done legislatively or in the courts, they try and get it through the back door of American business. So let's focus on the E, right? The US Congress has had the chance to ratify the Paris Climate Accords numerous times. They have failed to do so. They could have passed the Green New Deal. They have failed to do so. So what do the activists do instead? They go to companies like Chevron, an American energy company, and they tell them that they need to cut their Scope 3 emissions. Now, without getting too in depth on what Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 means, Scope 3 emissions means that Chevron would not only need to cut its own emissions, but they would need to find a way to cut the emissions of its upstream and downstream partners as well. So that shareholder proposal, which was put on the ballot in 2021, that got more than 60% of the vote, believe it or not. Because again, the everyday Americans who invest in Chevron, their vote and their values are not being reflected on the corporate proxy ballot. So what is the E of ESG doing to American energy companies? It's hamstringing them. And so at Strive, our goal is to take the ESG shackles off of the American energy sector, because big asset managers like BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, they push these initiatives down to American energy companies. And so when you're paying $5-6.50 at the gas tank, sure, blame President Biden and some of the administrative policies coming out of Washington, D.C., but also blame Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, because he bears a lot of the blame in this as well.
Liz, has Oklahoma passed laws that to say that companies here don't have to use ESG? And why would they if it's an optional corporate private company decision?
Well, I think Justin and Damon both made good points. There is no standard here, and it's a voluntary market. And in this voluntary market, all operators are trying to do is differentiate their commodity. And it's hard when there's no standard, when I never sit there and say, if you do this, I promise you a premium on your gas. Or you have to do this now, and it's exactly defined. Even with the passing of the recent IRA, we don't know what terms like empirical data mean. I will say in terms of state and legislation, there are other states like Colorado, where I am now, that have things like Reg 7. I mean, really tough regulations that have passed on operations, a lot to do with setback rules, where VOCs have to be monitored 10 days before completion of a well or fracking and 6 months after. So we do the monitoring portion of that. So again, our piece is to be aware of what is happening, especially on a regulation basis, but also try to stay ahead of some state policies to say, hey, I want to help you make an informed educational decision on what the technology is that's out there. So in terms of toughness on states, California, New Mexico, Wyoming, and Colorado, they all are affected a little bit heavier than Oklahoma right now, but it doesn't mean that things continue to change.
So I want to stay with you for a bit. I know, I think you've been in this for fairly recently in your career, not too recently, but are you passionate about this, and why? Why do you think people should be passionate about ESG measures?
Yeah, no, I did a lot of thinking before taking this job. I had grew up on the Chesapeake campus in the era of Aubrey McClendon, still work with Chesapeake as a customer on this side, and then worked on the picture physics geology side, on the science side of technology. So always was on the front end of improvements being made and understand completely how heavily a regulated industry this is. And even experienced a little bit of culture shock moving up here, growing up in the South, where energy is just felt. There's someone in your family or a friend that relies on energy even more directly than all of us do. So I never want to take a step back on those things being important to me. And went to AWS for a while covering Department of Energy. And that was my first time looking at public sector and understanding as a country, what are we investing in these national labs? And it did lead me to a point that said, can I be proud of my past? Believe that America absolutely should be able to produce and be a provider of natural gas, not only to us, but I mean, look at Europe and look at what's happening and the need that is there and a lack of infrastructure, not only in our country and in Canada, but also believe, and I call it, this is the Maya Angelou approach, we should do the best we can. And when we know that we can do better, we should do better. And that doing better part is there are ways to be this bridge of even the assessment. My favorite part of talking about it is this is to reward the good work you're already doing.
So Damon, you mentioned before that this isn't new. It feels new just because I'm just now hearing about it. So it feels new to me. You said it isn't new. A, how long has it been around? And B, is this something that can be watered down to a moral issue versus a bottom line issue? Is it that simple?
I think it's been around at least since the late 90s even, a version of ESG type of investing now, and it's steadily grown in terms of the number of dollars that have been invested in ESG funds over the last 20 to 30 years. I mean, it's a big deal in terms of the net assets invested in ESG funds. As far as can it be watered down, I'll say it this way. I have a lot of clients that they don't necessarily want our investment decisions or their portfolios to be based on a quote ESG score. But that doesn't mean that they don't want to practice some form of social investing. I have many clients that tell me, look, I'm opposed to tobacco or gambling or alcohol or guns or whatever. And they can restrict those industries from their portfolios, and we help them do that. So you can practice social investing on your own, whether you invest in ESG funds or you simply restrict those industries or those kinds of companies on your own, and you work with your advisor to do that. So I think everybody has some form of social investing they want to practice. Most people want clean air and water. They want social justice, those kinds of things. They want to be able, though, to build a portfolio that reflects their personal values as opposed to what somebody else says they should believe in. And that's really what I think it boils down to.
Justin, when it comes down to it, though, especially in this economy, businesses, large or small, really do need to look at the bottom line just to stay afloat. So, it's not saying you're against the environment or social equity for a diverse populace. Where is that balance, and why is there some pushback against ESG, just kind of from the true practical nature for business owners?
There's a place in society for culture battles. There's a place in society for political fights and political decisions. Those places are called state houses and Capitol Hill. So decisions right now that are being made by business, and again, it's the large asset managers in the world that are pushing this down on American companies. They rightfully belong at the ballot box of political elections, not the corporate ballot box. So let's take one specific issue on the governance side. Damon talked about it earlier. We talk about basically pushing affirmative action for boards of directors. Shareholder activists have been pushing this for a long time. Well, why not pass a law on that? Well, because federally it violates the 14th Amendment and about 27 federal statutes. The state of California has been trying to pass a state level law for years mandating affirmative action for the corporate boards of companies that are based on California. It's been kicked out of the courts as illegal there every single time. And so what do? You go around the political ballot box to the corporate ballot box to try and achieve change. Look at Disney and what they did with the parental rights bill in the state of Florida. So at Strive, what we're saying is there is a place for politics, but that belongs in state houses in Capitol Hill because those individuals are responsible to the American electorate. Bob Chapek, the CEO of Disney, he doesn't have a responsibility to the American electorate. He has a responsibility, a true legal fiduciary responsibility of duty of loyalty and duty of care to his shareholders. So we think companies that stay focused on their mission and stay focused on their customers are going to achieve better success. So that's what we're doing as an asset manager of Strive, engaging with these businesses saying, what is your actual mission? Is your mission to be a political actor? Or is your mission to be a great entertainment company if we're talking about Disney?
All right, I know there's much more to say, but we're out of time, so I'm going to leave it right there. Again, I would like to thank all three of you for sharing your time and your expertise with us. I've learned so much from all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Invitation.